Hey guys, so this video blog is one of my first supplement blogs. It is on creatine. If you haven't seen it, log on to phd-supplements.com. I've written in pretty nitty-gritty scientific detail a blog on creatine, from a cellular molecular level all the way up to the misconceptions really of creatine, which there are loads. So check it out if you haven't. I'll attach the link below. Basically just going through the myths debunked essentially. So firstly, what is creatine? So basically at a cellular level, creatine phosphate is used. It's made by the body itself, and it's supplemented to help the release of energy from ATP inside the mitochondria. So basically what that means at a molecular level, our cells have mitochondria, which are basically an organelle in the cell that is responsible. It's nicknamed the powerhouse of the cell, essentially where cellular energy comes from. So some of us would have heard of ATP. So what happens is adenosine triphosphate is basically it's got three phosphate groups, and when ATP loses a phosphate group and becomes ADP plus phosphate, there's a release of energy. This energy is used by the cell to do so many different things, DNA replication, everything within the cell. The muscle cells especially are just saturated in mitochondria for all this energy that we need. Muscular contraction, actin myosin, so this, essentially at a molecular level, this is what's happening. And what creatine monophosphate does, or creatine phosphate does, is it basically allows a pool of phosphate groups, so that when adenosine triphosphate loses a phosphate, it's quickly able to be restored. That it's now ADP, adenosine diphosphate, two phosphates. It's able to get a phosphate group and become ATP again, so adenosine triphosphate again quicker, because there's a pool of phosphates available. So essentially this is kind of what creatine supplementation is doing. So it's basically allowing for this reaction to occur at a faster rate, because you're basically restoring ATP quicker. Essentially this is what creatine is doing. So will creatine make you fat, or is creatine just for bulking? No, that's absolute rubbish. It's well documented in a lot of scientific papers that supplementing with creatine will cause an increase in about 0.5 to 3% increase in body weight. And what this body weight is, this increase in body weight, is water, essentially. So, this increase in water is inside the muscle cell. So the muscle cell is swelling that tiny bit more. That's not going to make you fat. It's going to make you appear bigger. You're going to be heavier, stronger, fitter. You're going to have a more explosive response. It's not going to make you hold water subcutaneous. It's just not. It's rubbish. So to say I'm only taking creatine now because I'm bulking is rubbish. For myself and some of my clients, I will advise them to use creatine during a cutting phase. Okay, so creatine loading, is it essential? No, it's not. Not at all. Would I advise it? Yes. So basically what's happening is you are oversaturating the receptors for creatine, essentially the creatine pool or store or the reserve of creatine monophosphate. And basically what that means is that if you do the loading phase and saturate your creatine stores, you're going to have an effect within a few days rather than a few weeks, essentially, for these pools or these stores to build up so that your creatine monophosphate can be used in, you know, the molecular reaction or the anabolic reaction of adenosine diphosphate and the phosphate group. So yes, I would recommend loading, but no, it's not essential. When to take creatine? I get asked this all the time. I take mine beforehand, I take mine after I train, I take mine first thing in the morning with orange juice. When is the best time to train? Generally, honest answer, there isn't one. Essentially what you're doing is, when you're restoring this pool of creatine monophosphates, that pool, you're restoring that pool every time you supplement with creatine. Does it make a difference when you take it? No, not really, as long as you're relatively consistent. So you know, someone who says, you know, I take my creatine just before I train, okay, that's brilliant, yeah, but if, you know, you're restoring your pool every 24 hours or thereabouts, just say, for example, you decide to take your creatine post-workout. You've just trained, you're storing your pool of creatine, and then, you know, by the time you train next, you're not gonna, you won't have decreased that pool of creatine phosphate in the mitochondria before you have to train again. So it doesn't really make a difference. What I would say is, whenever is most convenient for you is probably the best. Obviously, if you go too long without training, if you're doing double sessions, okay, that, you know, that might make a difference. But generally, people who are doing double sessions are people who are, you know, training harder for longer. You know, they're obviously going to have double sessions anyway. They're probably a bit more experienced. They're probably holding a bit more muscle mass, and therefore will need a different quantity of creatine in their diet anyway. You have to remember, if you're a 60 kilo woman or 120 kilo man, your muscle mass is going to be different. The amount of creatine that you're going to need for those reserves is going to be considerably, you know, there's going to be a massive difference. So as long as you stay relatively consistent with when you take it, it's not going to make a huge difference. I do see a lot of people that say, oh, I take mine post-workout because that's when muscles are most receptive. Okay, yeah, technically, if you want to be really, really technical about it, yes, you're going to get an insulin spike, you know, post-workout. You're probably going to have some carbs afterwards, and okay, maybe marginally, if you want to be really, really technical, the amount of time that it takes for that creatine to get inside the muscle cell, get inside the mitochondria, get inside those creatine phosphate pools is going to be quicker. Does that make a difference? Think about it. Does it make a difference? Not at all. Why? Because you're not going to be training for, you're not going to train, take your post-workout shake, your creatine, and want it in really, really quick so you can train again like you've just trained. So, you know, it's not going to make a difference. You're going to train, you're probably going to rest, recover. Even if you're doing double sessions, you're probably going to have 3, 4, 5 hours recovery before you train again, minimum. So you getting that creatine really, really quick into the muscle isn't going to make a difference. It's still going to be in the muscle. Most likely those creatine stores are going to be saturated by the time you train again anyway. So getting it in real quick isn't going to make a difference. As long as you're relatively consistent. Me personally, I take my creatine, I probably take about 5 grams pre, 5 grams post. Why do I do that? There's no science behind it. I just do it because it's, I just put it in my pre-workout shake, put in my VMX, 5 grams of creatine, 5 grams afterwards. There's literally no science behind that, really, to be honest. I mean, it is in and around my workout, you know, it's more convenient for me to take it on my pre and post workout shake rather than at 11 o'clock in the morning or before I go to bed. So that's just what I do. With my pre-workout shake, I've got my VMX, I put in some BCAAs, I put in some creatine, and that's my pre-workout shake ready to go. My post-workout shake, depending on what it is, depending on how, you know, how much food I'm on, my nutrition, the carbs I'm on, I'll put my creatine in. So no, there's no science behind it. That's just my personal preference. In terms of quantity of creatine, it completely varies, like I said. Completely varies. I know some people who take 15, 20 grams a day. Me personally, 10 seems to be just as, just fine for me. I know some people that say 5. Generally the dose is 5 grams. Obviously loading phase, it's going to change, and like I said, I do load creatine, so I might go up to 15, 20 grams for a few days until I feel like stores are saturated and my weight will go up. But yeah, like I said, it varies from person to person. It varies with the amount of train, the amount you train, what sort of training you're doing, how explosive you are in your training. There's so many different variables, but yeah, 10 grams just seems to be fine for me, 5 before, 5 afterwards. So there are quite a lot of people who ask me about dehydration and cramping and the relationship between both of those and creatine. So that's rubbish. Like, if you look at the blog, you'll see, there are quite a lot of scientific papers out there. There's one in particular from San Diego University showing that there's actual, when you think about what's happening with creatine, it's drawing water into the muscle cell. If anything, you're going to be, super saturated, you're going to be hydrated, not dehydrated. It's not going to cause cramping. If you look at the purity of the product you're taking, it shouldn't be an issue. I use creatine monophosphate, micronized creatine monophosphate. There's so many different types of creatine out there. I wouldn't touch anything if it's not micronized creatine monophosphate. I'm not just saying it because it's PhDs, but it's the perfect example. It's not. There's not. You're not getting loads of fillers. You're not getting loads of additives. So this whole idea that it's going to cause cramping or dehydration is rubbish. Look at the science behind it. There was the complete opposite effect in 2 of those studies done in that university. So naturally you will need to increase your water intake. You will feel like you're thirsty or thirstier than you normally would be. Here's the issue. Just because you're more thirsty or you're thirstier doesn't mean you're dehydrated. Being thirsty and dehydrated, we assume it's the same thing. It's not. If you take X amount of water in and you're peeing X amount of water out, if you take X amount of water in still, but some of that water is going into your muscle cell to slightly saturate your muscle cell with water, you're going to be taking less water out, and your body will think that it needs more water, because it does need more water, because your body is storing more water than it's used to, so it's trying to compensate, and you will probably feel like you need to take more water in. Don't be don't let that, what I'm trying to say, don't let that kind of sway you and make you think that just because you need more water you're dehydrated. You need more water because your body is holding on to more water so that it's less dehydrated, so that it's more hydrated, so that there's more water being saturated inside the cells. So don't make that mistake. You need to know the science behind what's going on before you go, oh, I'm really, really thirsty, I must be dehydrated. No, you're really, really thirsty because you're hydrated. Your body isn't used to you being as hydrated, so it assumes it needs more water because, So just be clear about what's going on. So dehydration and cramping is absolutely rubbish. Just to clear that up. You should be taking enough electrolytes in anyway, especially in and around when you train. The biggest mistake people make, so it's kind of going off the topic, but the biggest mistake I find that people take is they're taking carbs into a workout. Brilliant. Okay, how are those carbs going to get into the muscle cell? You're going to have, your muscle's going to be really receptive to those carbohydrates, whether it's dextrose, maltodextrin, cyclic dextrin, whatever type of carbohydrate you're taking in. However, to know the biology and the mechanistic channels that are going to draw those carbohydrates into the muscle cell, what else do we need? It's simple biology: water and electrolytes. You need to be drinking a lot of water. If you're taking your carbohydrates and you're not hydrated enough, then those carbohydrates aren't going to get drawn into the muscle cell as quick. Also, you need to have electrolytes. If you don't have the right electrolytes, that water isn't going to get taken into the muscle cell. The three most important things if you want to train that way, it's the biggest change I've made to my training is my intra-workout nutrition. Making sure I have enough electrolytes, making sure my carbohydrates are the right type of carbohydrates, and making sure that I'm properly hydrated around my training. So the other one is the dangers for your heart, your liver, and your kidneys when supplementing with creatine. There is no conclusive evidence anywhere to state what I've just said. There just isn't. It's just a media frenzy all the time. Such and such, this bodybuilder was taking creatine and this bodybuilder collapsed and a this and that or whatever. What else was that bodybuilder taking? Was he just taking creatine? Come on. Be realistic. Okay, you have to look at the scientific data, and there's no scientific data to suggest that creatine supplemented at the recommended dose has any effect on hepatic, cardiac, and kidney cells. There just isn't. So, you know, any studies, and there's a study referenced in my blog, blood lipid profiles did not change after 12 weeks of supplementing with creatine at a recommended dose. You know, there was no change in cardiac cells, hepatic cells, or kidney cells. There's just no data out there to suggest. We see this all the time in the media, X, Y, and Z. But you know, it's just rubbish. It's just rubbish. When it comes to people who are over 18 who are able to make their own decision and they want to look at the scientific data behind X, Y, and Z, go for it. I mean, there's a lot worse out there than creatine. There really is. I mean, you know, if you want to talk about like going on weekend benders, you know, recreational drugs, X, Y, and Z, and you're on about 5 grams of creatine being dangerous, really? Like, you know, I mean, so I don't have an issue with it. I wouldn't have an issue with my kids. Once they get to a certain age, they're well educated enough to know. Hopefully they will be well educated. I think that will be my first job, to educate them on nutrition. And once they make a conscious decision themselves to take creatine or not, that's up to them, as long as it's an educated decision. So have a look at my blog if you haven't. phd-supplements.com. It's in a lot better detail. It's basically just going through a few bits and pieces, bit of a rant. You know, it goes into a bit more scientific detail in the blog as well, so check it out.